The basic rules of any disciplinary process are that the employer must behave fairly, in accordance with ACAS guidelines, and that a decision to dismiss must be within the range of reasonable responses. Another way of saying the punishment must fit the crime. In the case of Trentside Manor Care Home and others versus Mrs. Raphael, the tribunal and subsequently the appeal tribunal agreed that there were deficiencies against all of those things. And they found that Mrs. Raphael had been unfairly dismissed and had been the victim of discrimination. The award exceeded £100,000. So, in 2015, Mrs. Raphael faced a life-altering event. She had a stroke. Soon after, she sought a 4-day work week, and that was grudgingly granted. Mrs. Raphael's employer, Mr. Dada, saw a subsequent minor error as an opportunity to dismiss her for gross misconduct. The disciplinary process was entirely a family affair, conducted by Mr. Dada's close relatives. His nephew and cousin held the hearing and the appeal hearing. Objectivity in disciplinary matters is essential, and the inference from this case was that there was a lack of objectivity. The tribunal believed Mr. Dada's influence was likely to have been present. JCHR's HR team is often asked to chair disciplinary processes where our client employers feel that we might be a bit more objective as an independent third party. And this is something that Trentside Manor's owners might have considered asking a third party to do in this particular case. In the cold light of day, Mr. Dada's cousin and nephew were always going to look vulnerable when it came to objectivity. Considering an employee's past record and service length is also important, but there was no evidence that that was considered in the case of Mrs. Raphael. The Equality Act would have considered Mrs. Raphael as disabled, and hence certain adjustments by her employer would have been expected. Now, the 4-day working week would have been one of those adjustments. A tribunal won't replace an employer's decision with its own view on what's reasonable when it comes to dismissal decisions. But what it will do is it'll want to ensure that the decision that's been taken falls within a range of reasonable responses. In this case, it decided it didn't. The case very much smacks of an employer determined to dismiss an employee, seizing the first opportunity, then inflating that, a minor issue, into a gross misconduct charge. JCHR's HR team have seen clients trying to do that for their own safety. We've always talked them out of it. So the aftermath, well, aside from the award, which in itself is quite substantial, reputational damage is the big issue here, I think. Bad press can hit hard, especially when a decision is viewed as inappropriate and the national papers take an interest, as they did here. Employers have to remember that employment tribunal processes are public. So, what could have been the alternatives? Well, the employer might have considered accommodating Mrs. Raphael's request properly and maybe using a trial period to iron out any issues. Another option, if they couldn't cope with that, could have been a voluntary, amicable exit deal under a properly constructed settlement agreement. Our HR team provides advice and hands-on management of processes. We can handle negotiations, offer support, and our support is designed to save time, money, and emotional stress, and, most importantly, to deliver the outcomes that the employer wants. Was the employer advised well in this case? If it was, it seems not to have followed that advice, and that has proved extremely costly. We can supply payroll and HR as standalone services, but JCHR's combined payroll and HR avoids duplication under a single contract. Call us on 01635 553 299 or email info@jchr.uk.